I found a shivering little kitten on a rainy night. The next day, I found its frozen body in the parking lot. My son Kim said in disgust. "Mom, can you get a clue? Aunt Lucy's scared of cats. Stop bringing this dirty stuff home." Tom stood next to his beloved Lucy, looking at me impatiently. So, I left Tom with divorce papers and moved out of our 7-year home overnight. Later, they came begging me to come back. Little did they know that on that rainy day, I was diagnosed with late-stage stomach cancer. When I found that little tabby kitten in the parking lot, it was already frozen, lying there stiff without any warmth. I remembered coming back from the hospital yesterday when it poured. It gets dark early in winter, and I sat in the car for a long while. I didn't get even a single call or text. Just as I got out of the car, I heard a faint meow. It was curled up under my car, its round eyes a bit watery, looking at me timidly. It was so small, not even the size of my palm. Maybe it was just too cold that night, and I hesitated for only 2 seconds before wrapping it in my scarf and bringing it home. When I got home, Kim was cuddling up to Lucy. He said, "Aunt Lucy is so gentle. I wish you were my mom." Tom was sitting across from them, his expression soft. The room was warm like spring, the three of them so happy together. I was soaked by the rain, bringing a chill into the house along with the kitten as we shivered in the hallway. They all turned to look at me, that happy moment shattered instantly. Kim glimpsed the kitten in my hand and looked at me with disdain. He scolded, "Mom, can't you be more sensible? Aunt Lucy's afraid of cats, don't bring these dirty things home." Tom frowned too, full of impatience. I knew he resented me for disrupting the harmonious moment they finally had. I eventually found a cardboard box for the kitten, patting it with a little soft shirt. It was something I knitted for Kim when he was really young. The kitten lay obediently, taking up just a tiny spot. By the afternoon, I had found someone willing to adopt it. But when I returned home, the box was gone. The shirt was crumpled, thrown in the trash. I held the kitten's stiff body in my hand. Looking at the house I lived in for 7 years through the rain, droplets running down my face. What a big home, a 3-story villa, but no space for a tiny kitten. Or for me. I quietly took care of the kitten's body. Then knocked on Tom's study door. He seemed busy, gave me a glance, clearly annoyed. I went up and handed him the divorce papers. "Sorry to bother you. Could you sign these, please?" Tom flipped through the divorce papers, his frown deepening, before he finally looked up at me. "The cat?" he questioned. Frowning, he paused slightly. "If you want to keep it, you can put it in the garage. Just don't let it into the house." He remained seated, yet his attitude was patronizing. As if his concession was such a grand gift to me. "No need. It's dead." I met his eyes calmly. "If there are no issues, I can move out right away." He stared at me. "What about Kim?" I did not hesitate. "I don't want him." I packed my bags that night. Not much to pack, really. After years of living here, everything was saturated with their presence. So I left it all. I only took a few clothes I usually wore, carried a suitcase, and left. As I walked out, Kim was holding Lucy's hand at the door. Lucy looked at me, seeming a bit sorry. "Jane, please don't blame them. It was because of my fear that Tom took the cat away." I glanced at her without a word, turned, and left. Just in time to hear Kim's innocent voice. "Aunt Lucy, don't worry, my mom will come back after a few days. She has nowhere else to go." I paused for a moment. Tom also spoke up. "Jane, if you leave, I won't come looking for you again." He was talking about the time when I found out his long-time love was Lucy, his stepsister. I felt it was absurd, upset, didn't know what to do, so I stayed in a hotel for a few days. Tom later found me, carrying Kim in his arms. Kim was really young then, his little face scrunched up as soon he saw me. Jumping into my arms, "Mom." I thought as he cried, maybe I should just move on. I didn't expect Lucy to come back from overseas. Both father and son seemed lost without her. Every step back I made turned into a knife to my heart, deeper by the day. That night, the pain was raw and I knew I had to back down. I turned, left my ring on the hall table. Smiled at them, "Don't worry. I'm not coming back. I bought a ticket back to your hometown overnight. It's a small place." After the train, I took 2 buses. Once there, I found a hotel and settled my luggage. Then I went to the cemetery. It was getting dark, the photo on the tombstone blurred. I reached out, gently tracing over the picture. I remembered when I was young, how those dry hands touched my head, calling me, Jane. Tears fell suddenly. I whispered, "Grandma." Only the darkness and silence responded. I wrapped my arms around the tombstone. Closed my eyes, for once feeling a bit of warmth in the cold winter night. Remembering how she used to say, "Jane, you're too soft-hearted. You'll get bullied." Back then, I didn't care, hugged her arm, acting spoiled, "As long as I have you." Later, I met Tom. With my parents gone young, and his single-parent family. Grandma noticed how I felt about him. She told me privately, "He's got a tough life too. If we end up together, I should love him well." I picked it up on my own, and did very well. These past years, I've dedicated all my time and energy to Tom. His mom remarried and moved to NYC, so I went to NYU with him. He wanted to start a business, and I stayed up countless nights supporting him. Later, we had Kim. He was too busy for family, and it hurt to see his dark circles get worse. I gave up my career to take care of our home. Gradually, I split my heart in 2, half for him and half for Kim. In the end, I forgot what Grandma said about loving yourself first. I hugged the tombstone next to me, like I'd cling to her in the past. "Grandma, we both saw the wrong person. Can you wait for me? I'm almost coming to see you." When I woke up, the smell of disinfectant was everywhere. The doctor said I fainted at the cemetery, and someone called 911. He looked at me and asked if my family knew I needed to be hospitalized. I just shook my head, "I have no family anymore." He hesitated but just told me to rest. Yet, I checked out the next day. The doctor wanted to speak but stayed silent. I went back to the small house where Grandma and I lived. It was old but cozy. I couldn't bring myself to sell it after she passed. Living there, I quickly settled in. Thankfully, Tom was generous and the divorce settlement was fair, so I didn't need to worry about money. I looked out the window, thinking about being buried next to Grandma one day. And on the day I was diagnosed with advanced stomach cancer, I was a bit scared. Even though Lucy was in the picture, Tom's the one I thought of first. I wondered if he'd struggle without me. And Kim, he's only 5, without a mom, he'd cry at night. Sitting in the car for 2 hours, I had no clue how to break the news that I was dying. But when I got home, I couldn't bring myself to say anything. In their eyes, I was not much better than a stray cat they couldn't save. Maybe without me, they'd finally be happy. On the 5th day back in my hometown, pain woke me up. My phone was vibrating nearby, and I groggily answered. "Hello?" But Tom's familiar, cold voice came through, "Jane, where'd you go?" By now, he treated me worse than his employees or the housekeeper. Weakly, I reminded him, "You shouldn't care, we're divorced." His breathing got heavy. I thought he'd get mad, like most times in the past couple of years, but his tone softened instead. "If you come back now, we can pretend nothing happened." I felt like laughing. Then I heard Kim's serious little voice. "Mom, didn't you always say to listen to Dad? Just apologize and come back." I felt a wave of nausea. After a pause, I spoke, "Kim, I told you to listen to Dad but also to know right from wrong." I stopped, then said, "And Tom, we're divorced. I won't come back, and please stop calling." After I hung up, I couldn't hold it in and retched. I had a really long dream. In it, Tom and I were like when we were young. Grandma had retired, but her pension barely supported us. She was old but insisted on selling things at night. Unable to watch her suffer, I took a work-study job at the school cafeteria. One busy night, only 2 buns were left when I circled back to the food. I chewed on one by the window, tasteless. Nearby, someone's stomach growled. It was Tom, working at the cafeteria too. I gave him one of the buns. We both kept to ourselves at school, rarely speaking to anyone. From that day, we'd quietly sit 2 seats apart after everyone left. We didn't talk much, just shared any job leads we found. When Grandma got sick, I panicked and called him in the middle of the night. He carried her to the hospital, and I sat crying in silence. He later said he'd never seen someone cry so quietly. When Grandma passed, he was by my side. Then, his mom remarried, moving to NYC. He smoked for the first time in front of me, his eyes deep amidst the smoke. I quietly decided to join him at NYU. College felt much the same as before. I learned more about his family. His mom had mental health issues. His stepdad was her first love. The stepdad's family had complicated dynamics, including a daughter named Lucy. A year after we moved, Lucy went abroad. I drowned in a fake happiness. Tom got drunk and kissed me one night, leading us to start dating. He cut ties with the family for Lucy, launching his business solo with my support. I believed we helped each other through dark times and hardships. When Kim was born, life felt perfect and complete. But when he turned 2, I accidentally unlocked Tom's phone. Maybe he didn't guard it from me, or he was overconfident. I found out we got together the day Lucy went abroad. And cutting ties with his family was really for Lucy. A year later, Lucy came back. There were countless nights I fell asleep on the couch waiting for him to come home, but he was always with Lucy. When Kim was sick in the hospital, I stayed by his side for 3 whole days, while he went abroad with Lucy for a performance. Lucy's messages flooded my phone, each picture was romantic and intimate. All this kept happening over 2 years. In the end, Kim joined their side. I finally became the odd one out in this family. Living in your hometown is pretty peaceful for me. When I don't feel well, I just stay home to read and nap. On good days, I'd take a stroll to the cemetery. The day I met Helen, I had dozed off at the cemetery again. In a haze, I felt someone gently tapping me. I opened my eyes and saw a head of fiery red hair. It startled me. Seeing I was awake, she relaxed a bit, then asked, "Why were you crying?" I touched my face and realized it was dry. She burst into laughter, "Just kidding." I thanked her, noticing it was getting late, and headed home. The next day, stepping out, I saw a familiar figure across the way opening a door. Her bright red hair was so eye-catching, I recognized her instantly. She seemed delighted and quickly introduced herself as Helen. She was my newly moved-in neighbor. Helen was cheerful and very friendly. From borrowing kitchenware to using the bathroom when the water was out, she quickly became acquainted with me. She showed me her pet turtles. I found it fascinating and asked why she chose turtles. She tapped on their shells and laughed, "Turtles live longer than people, you know. So, if I'm not around, the turtles can still keep my loved ones company." I nodded. Then I saw Helen without her wig. Her head was completely shaved. I couldn't hide my shock, but she just smiled nonchalantly. "I'm sick," she explained. "I'm about to start chemo, so I have to wear a wig. Pretty, right?" I looked at her seriously and replied, "Very pretty." Later, I learned that Helen, like me, had no family left. This made us bond even more. She was more optimistic than I was, though. She smiled and said, "I'm really serious about getting better. There are so many things I still want to do." She looked dreamily at me and asked, "Have you ever been to Iceland?" I hesitated and nodded. I had been there. That year, Tom and I finally visited the place I'd longed to see for so long. He proposed under the northern lights. I cried so much I could barely breathe. He leaned in and kissed me. Years later, I found out Lucy was also in Iceland at that time. Just a few minutes before proposing to me, Tom sent her a text. "Lucy, don't worry. You want me to get married, so I will." It was only then I realized the happiest moment of my life was just some discarded trash to others. My marriage with Tom was built on ruins from the start. Helen seemed to notice I didn't want to talk about it further. She blinked mischievously and said, "Beautiful views are blameless." So, I tried to recall Iceland's majestic glaciers, waterfalls, bubbling geysers, and the starry skies with auroras. Maybe we wouldn't have the chance to go again. Seeing the stars reflected in Helen's eyes, I slowly remembered the Iceland I once dreamed of. It had nothing to do with anybody else. I didn't expect to get another message from Lucy. In the photo, Tom lay on a familiar bed, his eyes closed, a slight frown on his face. Lucy was holding his hand, snuggled beside him. I thought she had accomplished her goal when I left his family. Over these 2 years, I had received many similar messages from her, at times taunting, sometimes gloating. I endured it again and again. Now, I'm done with it. I frowned and made screen recordings of our recent chats and sent them to Tom. Then I blocked them both. Whatever she intended, it has nothing to do with me anymore. I just wish they'd stop invading the little bit of life I have left. The next morning, I got a call from an unknown number. "Hello?" There was silence on the other end, and I was about to hang up. Then Tom's tired voice came through, "It's me." I frowned, speaking coldly. "We're already separated. Please make it clear to Lucy, I'm no threat to her anymore. Stop messaging me. How long has she been contacting you?" Tom paused. "Some things are not what they seem." I laughed bitterly. I saw more than just those photos, I felt his choices countless times. Whether those photos were real or fake, they no longer matter to me. Now, I don't wish to be a part of their games and have no energy to deal with them. Tom, whether it's what I saw or not has nothing to do with me now. Please stop bothering me. He seemed surprised by my firm stance. After a moment, he softened his tone. "Tom has been crying a lot lately, saying he misses you." I paused. Then I replied coolly, "Didn't my leaving fulfill your wishes? What's there for him to be upset about?" Helen mentioned wanting to catch a concert before her hospital stay in case she wouldn't get another chance. Before heading out, she turned and smiled at me. Maybe at that moment, her smile was too radiant. I asked, "Can I come with you?" She hesitated, then her eyes lit up with joy. And she took my hand, leading me out the door. I didn't know the artist on stage, the sound system was deafening. Most of the audience was young, dancing joyfully to the music. I hadn't been to a place like this in years, so it felt a bit overwhelming. But Helen looked over, grabbed my hand. So I swayed to the rhythm with her. Amidst a sea of unfamiliar faces, whenever I caught brief eye contact with someone, they flashed me an easy smile. I couldn't help but smile back at the next strangers I saw. Amidst this unfamiliar crowd, I strangely felt an overwhelming sense of vitality. Just then, the person on stage sang, "All things can be hoped for, but true love is the shortest. What's lost is never returned, yet eternity now repays." Helen leaned closer and whispered in my ear. I heard her sobbing through the shaky sound system. "Jane, we have to stay strong, live well." Like her, I had a table full of medication. She could easily notice something was off about me. Yet she never asked. She'd just suggest we take a walk whenever I sat by the window. I suddenly burst into tears. I watched her nod. I had lost so much in my short life. Never felt my parents' love. The grandmother who loved me left too soon. And the person I thought I'd spend my life with changed his heart so easily. But right now, I still want to live well. At least, face each remaining day with hope. I changed my number and finally cut ties with everything before. Helen's condition couldn't wait. She needed chemo right away and was already hospitalized. I planned to stay with her in the hospital. But some issues popped up with the cemetery plot we had agreed on, causing delays. So, I commuted daily between the hospital and home. I snapped photos of a turtle for Helen, telling her not to worry. When she saw the little turtle on the screen, she reached out to touch it with her fingertip. Today was her first day of chemo. I knew she was nervous. So I smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'll be here waiting for you." She held my hand tightly. When she came out of the doctor's office, she looked even paler. I stayed until she fell asleep before heading home. I didn't expect to see Tom and Kim there. Tom was holding Kim's hand, standing at my door. I was a bit dazed. Years ago, Tom and I had so much history in this house. After leaving your hometown, I returned almost every year, but he hadn't been back for years. I knew he was busy, so I never pushed it. After Kim was born, I suggested he come back to visit Grandma with us. Tom disagreed. "Your hometown is hard to get to, the kid is too small, I don't have time to accompany you, and you can't handle him alone." I thought they would never visit your hometown again. Yet here they were, big and small, standing at my familiar door. Tom saw me first. The hallway light was dim, not well maintained for years. He stood there and frowned slightly upon seeing me. Kim seemed a bit scared, clinging to his hand, but relaxed a little when he saw me. He stepped forward, looking up at me. "Mom, you're finally back. We've been waiting for you." His tone was the same as before, spoiled and a bit bossy, as he tried to hold my hand. I sidestepped, leaving his hand hanging in the air. He blinked at me, a bit hurt in his eyes. I ignored him, looked at Tom, and asked, "What are you doing here?" Tom finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Tom said he missed you." He paused. "Since he was born, he hasn't been to your hometown. I thought I'd bring him here to see it." He glanced at Kim, who nodded right away. "Mom, Dad said you met here, so I wanted to see where you and Dad lived." I knew at once he was lying. When Kim was born, Tom's company was already established. He grew up in the suburbs, never seen a place this run down. When I came back, he was full of disdain. I stared at him, coldly asked, "Is this how your dad teaches you to lie?" Both father and son were stunned. I remembered how he used to cling to me as a child. In the beginning, I hadn't quit my job, so we hired a nanny to take care of him. But he cried non-stop, no matter who we hired. All of us suffered sleepless nights due to his crying. He could only sleep peacefully by my side. So I gave up my career to look after him, corrected him whenever he made mistakes. After Lucy went back to China, she moved in with Tom. A gentle aunt versus a strict mom daily. He quickly sided with Lucy. Kim stood meekly behind Tom, tugging at his sleeve, avoiding my gaze. Tom stepped forward, scanning me again with an emotion I couldn't read. He rubbed his temples, his voice nearly pleading. "Jane, you've gotten so thin in your hometown. Come back with me, let's live as a family of 3, all right? Lucy won't bother us again." I let out a bitter laugh. How could he say such things so lightly? I had lost a lot of weight, my cheeks even sunken, due to stomach cancer preventing me from eating. But I didn't want to discuss it further with him. I turned, opened the door, and left both of them outside. This old building was nearly deserted. The following day, I found out Tom had rented the apartment downstairs. When I returned, he and Kim were again waiting by the door. I ignored them. He handed me a bouquet. Kim happily said, "Mom, I picked these for you, you'll love them. Blue and white, hydrangeas, my favorite ones." Years ago, it might have made me happy, but now I only felt annoyed with my path blocked. "Tom, do you think I'm some young girl who can be easily wooed?" He was taken aback when I knocked the flowers from his hand onto the ground. The next morning, he waited by the door with some food. The smell tickled my nose. I saw the name of the breakfast diner written on the bag. My favorite spot from high school. It was at least a 2-hour drive from here and back. Tom handed me the bag, quietly saying, "I bought these this morning, kept them warm, they should still be hot. You should eat." He glanced at me, hesitated, and said, "You've lost so much weight." The familiar aroma surrounded me, reminding me of the countless times I'd eaten it before. But now it only made me nauseous. I pushed Tom away and suddenly threw up. Maybe it was because of my terrible vomiting episode that Tom stopped blocking me at my front door. He stood far away, with Kim trailing behind him. Sometimes, he'd have Kim leave things at my door, but I tossed them all out without exception. Kim looked increasingly upset, but I didn't have time for them. I finally bought the plot next to Grandma's grave and went to the hospital to handle the admission procedures, only to find out Helen was gone. I stumbled home, gathered some stuff for the hospital stay, and put Helen's turtle in a small tank. Just as I stepped out the door, I blacked out. I have no idea how long I was out. As I came to, I heard familiar voices outside. "Doctor, how's she doing?" Someone asked. "Who are you to her?" The doctor replied. After a pause, the voice said, "I'm her husband." The doctor sighed and said, "Late-stage stomach cancer. We can only continue with chemotherapy." The person exclaimed in disbelief, "What are you saying?" "Say that again." But the doctor seemed unfazed. "Late-stage stomach cancer. Should have come sooner, right?" When I woke up, I was in a private room. Kim was asleep at my bedside, holding my hand with his little fingers. I pulled away and turned over, spotting the little turtle on the windowsill. It was tucked into its shell, barely moving. I stared at it for a while, a tear rolling down my cheek. "Helen, if there's another life, I hope I can live healthily and with hope." At some point, Kim woke up and saw me staring at the turtle without moving. When he called for me, I didn't respond. He then tried to move the tank from the windowsill. But he was too short, and it was heavy. The tank slipped from his hands, shattering to pieces. The turtle hit the ground, sticking its head out of the shell. Kim seemed startled, about to reach for it. I yelled sharply, "Don't move." Tom, probably hearing the commotion, rushed into the room. "What happened?" he asked hoarsely. I only looked at Kim and coldly said, "Get out." I'd never raised my voice to Kim before. Even if he messed up, I always knelt down and talked to him gently. He stood there, stunned, and tears erupted soon after. It was almost dark when Tom returned to the room. Still sitting in the same position, I glanced at him briefly before turning away. He sat by my side, cleared his throat, and perhaps thinking I was worried about Kim, explained, "I sent Tom back." I didn't react. After a while, he said in a low voice, "Jane, come back to New York City with me." There was a hint of a plea in his voice. I looked at him coldly and mocked, "Didn't I say I wouldn't return? And didn't you say you'd never come for me again?" A crack formed in Tom's calm expression, words catching in his throat. After a pause, he looked up with red eyes. "The doctor said returning to New York City, with better healthcare, we could." I interrupted sharply, "No need, it's beyond cure." The expression he tried so hard to maintain instantly shattered. He cried out, breaking, "Jane." I glanced at him and shut my eyes. In a half-dreamy state, I heard his stifled cries. In all those years, I'd only seen him cry once, when his mother passed. He had buried his head in my neck, with a similar stifled sound, soaking my shoulder. I'd felt so sorry for him and cried alongside him. Now, I forced my eyes open. Tom's face was soaked, and the hand I reached out instinctively hung in the air. This Tom wasn't worth my sympathy. His tears fell again. Maybe knowing there was truly no recovery, he didn't mention returning to NYC anymore, and he didn't leave either, staying by my side every day. Mostly, he watched me silently or stared at his laptop working. Kim was too scared to come close. Now Kim should be on winter break, but I had no idea how Tom managed the time. He used to be too busy even to come home. The pain got worse, and I often slept in bed. After the first chemotherapy, I woke to a meow. Opening my eyes, I saw Kim holding a cat opposite me, identical to the one I'd once found. Seeing me awake, he excitedly held the kitten up. "Mom, look. This cat's just like the one before." I named it Fluffy. I looked at him coldly. Things that die don't come back to life. Tears welled in his eyes. Tom came in just then, taking something from his pocket, and knelt before my bed, eyes moist. "Jane, I was wrong before. Please let us be here for your final journey, okay?" He held our wedding ring, which I'd given back to him the day I left. Kim looked at Tom, then nervously at me. "Mom, you told me before, if you know you're wrong and change, you're a good kid. Dad and I both know we were wrong. Will you forgive us?" I watched the father and son in front of me, a slight smile forming. Some mistakes aren't meant to be made. I used to hope you'd be on my side, but your hearts were elsewhere. Tom, do you know how many times I wondered when your heart wandered to someone else? In the end, I realized it was just wishful thinking on my part. The day I was diagnosed, I was really scared. I sat in the car for 2 hours trying to figure out how to tell you without hurting you. But when I got home, I realized no one needed me. Tom's ring rolled under the bed as he lowered his gaze, choking up, "I'm sorry, Jane." Watching him, I just felt tired. I sighed and said, "Please, don't bother me anymore. Don't make me hate you more." Tom and Kim didn't show up in front of me again. Sometimes, when the nurse wheeled me out to the yard to get some sun, I'd spot a familiar back. While sleeping, I sometimes felt a familiar presence nearby. But not seeing them actually made me feel a bit better. Although most of the time, I still had to rely on for nutrition. I dreamt about Grandma and Helen. The next day, after consulting with the hospital, I signed the organ donation agreement. I gave up on the thought of being buried next to Grandma. I knew she wouldn't blame me. In my final days, I could still do something for others. Way better than just lying underground, right? One night, I woke up in pain but didn't open my eyes. I couldn't go back to sleep either. Suddenly, I felt a pair of warm little hands soothing the frown on my forehead caused by the pain. Kim whispered, "Mom, are you in a lot of pain?" I kept my eyes closed. He continued, "Dad had to rush back home for something urgent, so I dared to come see you." He said, "Sadly, Dad doesn't let me near you anymore, and I miss you so much." Despite my foggy consciousness from the pain, I heard him whispering in my ear. "Mom, will you become Lucy in the sky?" Dad won't tell me, but I secretly asked the doctor today, and he said you'd become Lucy in the sky watching over me. I'll miss you. After a while, his small, tearful voice came through again. "Mom, I don't want you to be Lucy. Dad said it's because I lost the kitten and it died, and you were angry about it, so you're leaving us. I was wrong. Don't leave me, okay? I'm taking good care of little Flower now, feeding it milk, cleaning its litter. Even though it smells bad after. Mom, don't worry, I'll treat it well from now on." As Kim kept talking, his voice gradually faded. His steady breathing sounded out. Spring was near, but the nights were still a bit chilly. He moved closer to me for warmth. Afraid to touch my hand, he lightly tugged at my sleeve. I forced my eyes open and saw the tear-stained traces on his face. After a moment, I sighed, struggled to lift my hand, and gently patted his head. Just like when he was little. Touching his head made him sleep more soundly. He seemed to sense it, nuzzling my palm lightly. I gave a small smile. My hands slowly fell back down. Kim's epilogue. Before Tom passed away, I visited him in the hospital. Since he went into the mental hospital, we hadn't really talked for over a decade. Seeing me drove him mad. I knew it was because I resembled my mom about 50–60%. Every time he saw me, he mumbled from the corner, "Jane, I was wrong, I was wrong." So, the doctors told me not to aggravate him much. I visited less and less. Besides, I had little desire to see him anyway. I still remember the day my mom died. I was lying next to her on the bed. When I woke up, her body was cold. Tom raced back to his hometown overnight, eyes blazing with fury. He slapped me and told me to get out. Because he always believed that losing the kitten was why Mom left us. At one time, I believed it too. Later, I realized it wasn't just that. Lucy was Tom's half-sister from his dad's side. They had a relationship that was unclear and messy. Not long after Mom passed, Lucy committed suicide. I found Tom disgusting and spent most of my time at school, rarely seeing him. Until I was 15 and personally sent him to the mental hospital. That night, Little Flower snuck into his room. Unable to find the cat, I called for Little Flower throughout the mansion. Hearing the cat's shrill cries outside his door startled me. Thankfully, the door wasn't locked, and I pushed it open. Little Flower was sitting by his bed, meowing loudly. He appeared oblivious, holding a fruit knife, hurting himself. His arm was drenched in blood. When I sent him to the hospital, the doctors said some of the scars were years old. I realized then he might have been crazy for a long time. The lawyer told me he had made a will ages ago. The money he left would keep me financially secure for life. Now, lying on the hospital bed with tubes all over, his hair was already fully gray. Seeing me, he seemed finally a bit clear-headed, speaking in a hoarse voice. "Tom, you came." I nodded, "Yeah." He smiled, "Don't be sad. I'm going to see your mom soon." Honestly, I didn't feel particularly sad. I heard my grandma had mental health issues. And Tom went mad too. A whole family of crazies. Sometimes, I feared I might lose it one day too. But I often remember that night, feeling my mom touching my head. It makes me think, maybe, she forgave me. Even if she didn't, it's okay. I've been trying hard to be a responsible, hopeful person like my mom. Just as I promised her that night, I've taken good care of Little Flower. I also started a free rescue shelter for stray cats and dogs. And the turtle from her hospital room, I've kept it all these years too. If one day I get to see my mom again, I won't be useless like Tom, just saying I was wrong. I'll tell her I did it.